Okay, hello. Thank you for coming. I'm going to present our paper, Effects of Compliant and Structural Parts in a Evolved Modular Robot. You can see my co-authors here on the slide. So, for this paper, we were inspired by elastic tendons in animals in nature. So animals in nature have a lot of specializations in their morphology that have adapted over time to save energy, for example, for the animal. And one example of this is elastic tendons. So animals have elastic tendons, and during the gait cycle of the animal, they can store and release kinetic energy, which saves a lot of work for the animal's limb. And this has been imitated a lot in hand-designed robots as well, by using compliant parts that can be used to save energy or to reduce stress on the joints in the robot. And we wanted to look at this in the context of evolving modular robots. So it's not much research has been done on using these kinds of components in evolving modular robots. So we wanted to look at whether there is a selection pressure towards springiness when evolving modular robots. So we co-optimize the morphology and controller of evolving modular robots. And we also evolve the springiness of the robots. So we use 3 different modules that the robots can use. So either this beam component, a connector block component, or an actuator component. This actuator component is a series elastic actuator, which means that it is a bit compliant. The rotational spring is attached in series to the motor. And the springiness of each actuator is evolved alongside with the morphology. So our robots were encoded with a direct encoding, which you can see illustrated here on this slide. Each robot is represented by a tree structure that you can see on the left here. Each node in this tree contains information about a module, what type of module it is, and also what is connected to this module. And for the actuators, also the rotation of the module and the controller for the module, and also the springiness of this actuator is recorded in the node. So the controller we use is just a decentralized approach with a sine wave used to control each actuator. So on the bottom right here, you can see how, like in a simplified 2D example, how this tree could be decoded into a robot. And on the top there, you just see an example of a random robot. So yes, we use series elastic actuator. So I thought I would demonstrate to you what this means. So here I have a video of 2 example dummy robots. One on the left, which has quite stiff springs, and one on the right, which has more compliant springs. And they are dropped to the ground, and on the bottom here, you can see the Y position of the height of the core module here in dummy robots. So I'll just play the video. I think that's more intuitive. So you can see that the one on the left keeps bouncing long after the one on the right keeps bouncing far after the one on the left has stopped. You can also see on the graph there the bounciness of the right one. So on to the experiments with it. Our first iteration was to just try the straightforward approach with evolving modular robots with a standard evolutionary algorithm and see what happened, where these robots evolved springy. So I'll just move on to the results. One thing I should say is that we evolved for 4 different cases with different combinations of modules available for the algorithm. So you see these letters here for each of the 4 different experiments, then, or sub-experiments within this one, then these codes mean which modules were used. So for the top one, all 3 modules were used. For the bottom one, with just an S, it means only the actuator module was used. SC, it's the actuator module and the connector box. And SE here is the actuator and beam. So some things we discovered by looking at statistics from running these 4 combinations for 20 evolutionary runs was that there was not so much difference in the distance walked, like the maximum fitness for the different combinations, but that the combinations with structural modules had lower cost of transport. So this means that they can carry more mass over the distance they are walking. So since these have structural modules, then there is more mass carried per actuator without losing speed, which means that they have a lower cost of transport. We also saw that, which is quite intuitive, that the ones using structural modules had far fewer joints or actuators, but that the volume of the robots was approximately the same across all 4 combinations. But most interesting, of course, is the springiness. So in this graph, for each of the 4 combinations, all actuators from the elite in the last generation of all 20 runs is possible. So we take all 20 runs, delete from each of them, get all the actuators, and each actuator is 1 point here. So we can see here that they seem to be using quite springy modules. But the one thing we had to do when evolving the robots was to use a non-linear translation between the genome and the actual springiness. And this is because for lower values, changing the number just like the spring constant just a little bit has quite a large effect, while for high values, when the springs are stiff, changing the number just a little bit does not have so much of an effect. So that's why we used the natural logarithmic scale. This is just the same information as in the previous slide, but here it is translated to the natural logarithmic scale. And here we can see, so this will correspond to the value in the genome instead of the actual springiness. Here we can see that the ones with a lot of structural modules tend to use stiffer springs. And this might be because these robots have a lot of mass compared to the number of actuators they have. So we think this might be because very compliant springs might be compressed under the weight of the structural modules. And that's why they might prefer stiffer springs. And this is also an effect observed in nature, that animals that are larger often have less elastic tendons. So for the other 3, there is not so much we can read out of this. They seem to be using modules with various degrees of springiness. And there can be multiple reasons for this. Either that this how springy the modules are doesn't matter, of course, could be one reason, but also the robots that are represented here are very different. Some are small, some are big, and we already had the intuition that larger robot might need stiffer springs. So we thought we can't read so much out of this, so we want to explore this further with a second experiment, in case this is due to the springiness varying based on morphology. And that's why we decided to use mathletes. So our intuition was that the size of the robot would affect what springiness was good for that robot. Therefore, we wanted to guarantee having a diversity of different robot sizes and also a diversity of spring stiffness. So you could see if there is some connection between the spring stiffness and the morphology or the size of the robot. So MapLeads is an evolutionary algorithm that creates a grid, the quality diversity algorithm. So the search space is divided into niches to the dimensions I just mentioned, and only the best robot within each niche is saved, and that collection of elites is used as the population of the evolutionary algorithm. So, for example, in the bottom left corner, or the top left corner of the map, we have this tiny, very springy robot. And in the bottom right, we would have a large and quite stiff robot. So here you can see the resulting maps for running this algorithm 20 runs. So here you can see the dimensions of each map is the module count on one axis and the spring constant on one axis. And the algorithm then searches for the best individual within each square of this map. So yeah, these four are then the four different combinations of modules. So this is a very complex system, and plotting like this, the data might look a little bit noisy, and perhaps infinite computation power might have solved that, but we didn't have infinite computation power. So, but looking at this second to left, SC was the one that found highest diversity of different, like high fitness robots. So the color of each square here is in the distance that the robot walked. One thing that is interesting that we can see is that this bottom left corner has no high fitness robots. And in this corner is the robots with a high module count, so they're quite large, and also very compliant springs. So there is at least some indication that robots with high module count and very compliant springs are not so good, which also was similar to what we saw in the previous experiment. We can also see a little bit that the highest fitness, which is the yellow squares here, are quite close to this area between 205 and 470, the spring constant. But we think that further research would be needed to conclude on the usefulness of the springs, because it's difficult to look at this and understand anything about how that robots are actually using the springs, whether they are actually using the springs to store and reuse energy. Yep. So for the future work, we would like to do exactly what I mentioned now. It would be really interesting if we could find some way to measure how much each robot is using the springs to store and release energy, to get some more intuition about how the robots are actually using the springs and if they're using them in a meaningful way. And last, I just want to show you a couple of example robots that were evolved. The video was great. Okay, thank you. That was
Okay, thank you very much.